Milo stepped out of his battered pickup, breathing in the stale, muggy air of the little town he now called home. They said chief of police came with respect, but so far, all he'd gotten were cold stares and the occasional mutter. This wasn't Milo's first town or his first uniform, but something was different about this place. It was small, tight-knit, and had secrets they didn't want outsiders uncovering. He'd barely settled into his new office when he got the feeling someone was watching him. From the way folks gave sideways glances to the strange welcome he'd gotten from a couple of officers at the precinct, it was obvious Milo wasn't wanted. But this was his assignment, and he wasn't one to back down. His instincts sharpened as he walked down the main street, hands tucked in his jacket, just another face among the locals. But his position was hardly a secret, and he soon noticed two officers, Dax and Bucky, who had a reputation for being more enforcers than protectors, eyeing him from across the street. They looked young, cocky, and had that smirk that told Milo they already felt untouchable. He entered a dingy little cafe, and almost instantly, the air in the room went heavy. Conversations dropped, and all eyes turned to him as he ordered a coffee to go, keeping his face blank. Dax and Bucky strolled over, grins spreading as they got close enough to size up the new guy. "Lost, old man?" Dax's voice was smooth, but there was a sharpness under it. The room hung in silence, waiting to see Milo's reaction. "Just here for coffee," Milo said, locking eyes with Dax. He noticed how the officer's badge glinted under the cafe's dim light, almost as if it were daring Milo to make a move. Bucky chuckled, arms folded as he leaned against the counter. "You'd better be. See, strangers don't last too long here, especially ones that don't know our rules." Milo shrugged, taking his coffee without another word and heading outside, feeling their stares on him until he turned the corner. The message was loud and clear. But if these two were the gatekeepers of the town's rules, he'd have to be prepared for more than just coffee shop antics. The next morning, Milo laced up his running shoes and headed out early, looking for a little fresh air and a way to shake off the tension. But halfway through his jog, a patrol car pulled up alongside him, kicking up dust as it stopped. Sure enough, Dax and Bucky were inside, grinning like they'd just cornered a wild animal. "Where are you running off to?" Dax asked, leaning out the window with that same smug smirk. Milo slowed to a stop, meeting his gaze. "Just taking in the morning, officer." "Is that right?" Bucky chimed in, stepping out of the car. "Well, seeing as you're new here, maybe you ought to know, this area is for locals. Strangers have a habit of, well, getting into trouble." Milo's jaw tightened, but he kept his face calm. "Is it against the law to jog around here?" Dax's eyes narrowed, his tone shifting. "Depends on who you're asking. But let's just say we don't exactly roll out the welcome mat for people like you." And just like that, Bucky was beside him, patting down his pockets. Milo held back a flash of anger as they rifled through his things, making a show out of it, clearly for the benefit of whoever might be watching from their windows. Finally, Bucky pulled out a small, broken pen cap, holding it up between his fingers like he'd just found something incriminating. Well, he sneered. "What have we got here?" Milo glared at them both. He knew exactly what game they were playing, and it was about to backfire on them in ways they couldn't imagine. But right now, he couldn't blow his cover. Not yet. Milo let the broken pen cap dangle in Bucky's grip for a few seconds, his eyes expressionless. The two officers were practically vibrating with the thrill of their little find. Milo could tell they'd probably rehearsed this act a dozen times before on other unlucky newcomers. But he wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of playing along. "Got something to say?" Bucky taunted, waving the pen cap inches from Milo's face. Around them, a few townspeople had stopped to watch, eyebrows raised, whispering to each other. The crowd was small for now, but Milo could feel the eyes on him. He sighed, meeting Bucky's gaze with unflinching calm. "You're real thorough, aren't you?" Dax snickered, stepping closer, the scent of his cheap aftershave thick in the air. "Oh, we're just getting started, pal." Before Milo knew it, he was being yanked toward the town square, where the morning bustle was in full swing. People were opening shop doors, hauling in supplies, and going about their routines, until Dax and Bucky paraded him toward the center lamppost. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dax called out, a twisted grin on his face. "We got ourselves a rule breaker here." The townsfolk stopped, some with bemused expressions, others looking on in mild curiosity. It was a performance, and Milo was the unfortunate star. Milo's hands were pulled behind his back, bound to the lamppost with a pair of cuffs. He watched as people started filming, the glint of phones reflecting the sun's glare. Dax gave a mock bow, grinning wide for the cameras. "Outsiders think they can just come in here and do as they please, huh?" Milo stayed silent, his eyes scanning the crowd. Some people chuckled, clearly entertained, while others just shook their heads, as if this was nothing new. "Think you got a few tricks up your sleeve, stranger?" Bucky jeered, making sure everyone could hear. He leaned close to Milo, voice low enough, so only he could hear. "People like you don't last here. I'd start thinking about packing up." Milo took a deep breath, resisting the urge to retaliate. He knew these two had the upper hand for now. He let them play their little game, let them think they'd gotten under his skin. But Milo was already thinking 3 steps ahead. By the time the sun set that evening, clips of Milo cuffed to the lamppost had made their way online, spreading across social media. The tags were brutal. Hashtag new sheriff drama. Hashtag small town justice. Hashtag abuse of power. It wasn't long before the videos racked up thousands of views, with commenters throwing around theories and opinions. As Milo sat in his dimly lit kitchen, the phone rang. It was the precinct's main office. "Milo," came the voice of Captain Langley. "I just saw the video." The captain's tone was tense, but restrained. "I imagine it wasn't exactly what you expected when you hired me," Milo replied dryly, the faintest hint of sarcasm creeping into his voice. "No," the captain replied, "but maybe it's exactly what we need." The call ended, and Milo took a moment, leaning back in his chair. He could feel the shift. This wasn't just a bad first day anymore. It was something bigger, something that was taking on a life of its own. And Dax and Bucky had unknowingly handed him the perfect setup to expose whatever it was they'd been hiding in this town. The next morning, Milo walked into the police station with a confidence that surprised even him. He wore his badge polished and his uniform crisp, the weight of it feeling heavier than usual as he pushed open the doors and stepped into the main hall. Inside, the usual chatter died down as he walked in. Dax and Bucky were there, laughing and joking like they owned the place, completely unaware of the storm brewing outside. When they spotted him, they fell silent, their eyes narrowing as they took in his uniform. Well, Dax said, a sneer forming on his lips. "Look who decided to show up." Milo let the silence stretch, watching their smug expressions falter just slightly. "You boys have been busy, haven't you?" he finally said, his voice calm, but with a hard edge. Bucky snorted, crossing his arms. "Just a little local tradition, Chief," he said, the word dripping with sarcasm. "Tradition," Milo repeated, raising an eyebrow. "You mean the tradition of publicly humiliating strangers who don't know your rules?" Dax shrugged, his smirk barely hiding the flicker of unease in his eyes. "Keeps people in line. Make sure everyone knows who's in charge around here." Milo stepped closer, lowering his voice, so only they could hear. "If you two were smart, you'd be clearing out your desks." The words landed hard, and Milo could see it in the way their expressions shifted from smug to startled. He didn't need to say more. The weight of his gaze was enough to make them squirm, their bravado crumbling as the reality sank in. But Milo wasn't finished. He glanced around, addressing the entire room, his voice carrying an authority that demanded attention. "From now on, things are changing. This town deserves respect, and that starts with the way we treat every person who steps foot here." The news spread like wildfire. The video of Milo's humiliation had only been the beginning. Now, Dax and Bucky's reputation was unraveling, and locals started coming forward with stories that painted a much darker picture. Over the next few days, townspeople told tales of intimidation, coercion, and worse, all at the hands of officers who'd turned law enforcement into their personal power trip. Milo watched as reporters gathered outside the station, capturing the chaos he'd helped expose. The media frenzy was relentless, and soon the entire state was talking about the tiny town with the corrupt cops. People showed up outside the station with signs demanding accountability and change. Finally, Milo called a meeting, gathering all the officers in the main hall. His gaze swept over each one of them, letting the silence hang thick in the air. "Today," he said, his voice steady, "we're drawing a line in the sand. Anyone who disrespects the people of this town, who uses their badge for personal gain, is out. Effective immediately." Dax and Bucky shifted uncomfortably, exchanging worried glances as Milo's gaze locked onto them. He pulled out 2 termination forms, signing them in front of the entire force. "Dax, Bucky, hand over your badges." The 2 officers looked stunned, speechless for the first time, as Milo held out his hand expectantly. The room was silent as they slowly unpinned their badges, the weight of their downfall hitting them with each second. Without another word, they left the room, the tension thick as everyone watched. For the first time, the townspeople felt a sense of hope. Milo had done what no one thought possible. He'd taken on the untouchable, and he'd won. But Milo knew this was just the beginning. There was a long road ahead to rebuild trust, and he was prepared to walk every step of it. News of Dax and Bucky's dismissal spread through the town like lightning, sparking reactions from every corner. Some townsfolk were thrilled, feeling vindicated by Milo's swift justice. Others, who'd been either intimidated by or loyal to the officers, looked at Milo with resentment, muttering under their breath as he passed by. It was clear that the town was divided, and Milo had stirred up something deep and long buried. As Milo continued his patrols, he noticed the way people eyed him, some with respect, others with wariness, and a few with outright defiance. But he also saw a spark in the town he hadn't noticed before, a quiet, cautious hope that maybe things were finally changing. One evening, Milo received a call from a town local, an elderly woman named Mrs. Weller, who claimed to have information he'd need to hear in person. He arrived at her small home on the edge of town, noting the rundown state of the place. Peeling paint, crooked shutters, weeds creeping up the sides. She invited him in with a shaky hand and a weary smile. "Milo," she started in a voice softened by years of keeping quiet, "I'm glad you're finally here." As she began to talk, Milo learned just how deep Dax and Bucky's abuse of power had gone. Over the years, they'd built a network of informants and favors, running a small empire of fear among those 2 intimidated to resist. They'd used their position to control who succeeded in town and who didn't, their twisted version of justice bleeding into every corner of the community. Mrs. Weller had been one of their clients, pressured into silence for years. "It wasn't just me," she confessed, wringing her hands. "Others, good folks, people who try to stand up to them, they were all dragged down." Mrs. Weller's words lit a fire in Milo. This wasn't just about Dax and Bucky anymore. It was about dismantling the toxic legacy they'd built in the town, brick by brick. The next day, Milo called a town meeting, inviting every resident to come and speak their truth. It was a bold move, and he didn't know how many people would show. But by evening, the town hall was packed. Faces from every walk of life filled the seats, from shop owners to farmers, families with children, and older folks who had seen this town change over the years. Milo stood at the front, meeting each gaze as the murmurs quieted. "Tonight," he began, "is a chance for everyone to speak freely. I know there's been fear of stepping out of line, of saying the wrong thing, of challenging the wrong people. But today, that fear ends. Today, we're reclaiming our town." One by one, people stood up, sharing their stories. A local business owner talked about how his shop had been vandalized multiple times for not donating to Dax's so-called community fund. A high school teacher recounted how Bucky had once threatened her into passing his nephew, despite the kid's dismal grades. A single mother spoke of the fear that had kept her silent when Dax had started harassing her, knowing that her complaints would only fall on deaf ears. As each person shared their story, the air in the room grew heavy with the weight of years of suppressed pain. But there was also relief, a tangible sense of release as people finally spoke without fear of reprisal. By the end of the night, Milo felt the energy in the room shift. The crowd was no longer silent, beaten down. They were energized, standing in unity against the officer's twisted legacy. In the following weeks, Milo worked tirelessly with local officials, building a case against Dax and Bucky. Thanks to the testimonies and evidence from the town, they were soon facing formal charges that went far beyond a simple termination. Abuse of power, harassment, bribery. Every allegation was meticulously documented and would soon see the light of day in a court of law. Milo didn't expect the trial to go unnoticed. Reporters once again descended on the small town, this time painting a very different picture. The headline spoke of a town reclaimed and justice for a community, while the once powerful duo of Dax and Bucky became symbols of everything wrong with unchecked authority. Throughout the trial, Milo watched as his community, once fractured by fear, now stood united in pursuit of justice. One by one, people took the stand, sharing their stories under oath. There was a dignity to the proceedings, a sense that they were finally taking back what had been stolen from them. In the end, the verdict was clear. Dax and Bucky were convicted on multiple counts, their sentences reflecting the years of damage they'd inflicted on the town. As they were led away in cuffs, Milo felt a rare sense of closure, a quiet triumph that wasn't about personal victory, but about restoring integrity to a place that desperately needed it. In the months that followed, Milo worked with town leaders to rebuild the police force from the ground up, handpicking officers who understood the true meaning of service. The station became a place of trust again, a beacon for those who had once feared it. Townsfolk began stopping Milo on the street, some with handshakes, others with hugs, thanking him for making a stand. And while Milo knew he'd only been a catalyst, he couldn't help but feel a quiet pride in watching the town he'd once been so unsure of begin to thrive in the light of its newfound freedom. One evening, as he strolled through the town square, he noticed Mrs. Weller sitting on a bench, watching the sunset with a serene smile. She looked up as he approached, nodding as if to say, "You did it." Milo smiled back, tipping his hat in respect. He knew his work here wasn't done. There would always be challenges, conflicts, and the occasional resistance. But as long as he held the badge, he'd make sure this town remained a place where justice and respect reigned supreme. And with that, Milo walked on, feeling more at home in the little town than he ever had, ready for whatever came next.